by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries. In the weeks ahead, you will see these and other programs by various denominations. Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs series at the crossroads of religion and life. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues in the area in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC TV. Join us now for this week's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
Welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Carl Gronberg, the host for your program today. It's cartoon time on Austin Faith Dialogue. You've seen the picture of the adult person standing over another person in bed, sleeping, trying to wake him up and saying, "It's time, we've got to go to church, we've got to go to church." And the person in bed says, "Oh no, I don't want to go to church. You've got to go to church, you've got to go to church." "No, please, I don't want to go to church this week." "Why do I have to go?" And the adult person standing up says, "Because you're the pastor." It's that way for a lot of pastors. Today we're going to talk on Austin Faith Dialogue about pastoral burnout, where clergy of all communities of faith experience a sense of burnout in their lives, and what you can do, you who care about your worshiping community, and you who care about your worship leaders, what you can do to give them support and minister to them. I'd like to introduce to you three people from our community here in Austin who are going to talk with me today about clergy burnout. Dr. Steve Larson, a pastoral therapist here in Austin, and Nancy Lottman is with the Concordia College. She's director of campus life. And Father Ed Jordan at St. Teresa's Parish. Welcome to the three of you. Glad to have you on Austin Faith Dialogue. And let's talk about it. Ed, you've grown up in the Roman Catholic faith, and you told me before the program that you've seen and experienced with a lot of your fellow priests that experience of clergy burnout.
I think particularly began about 15 or 20 years ago. We began to talk about burnout and that kind of stress. And part of what the men related at the time was a feeling of living always on a pedestal, of being anticipated that you were competent to handle any kind of human problem, that you were, it was the 3-year-olds that called you God, but you sort of responded even to the adults that way. And some men just said, that's enough of that, I can't take that anymore.
Unwilling to kind of carry that responsibility of being the deity to people, is that right?
Right. I suppose part of that came out in the United States of us being an immigrant church, until we used 1960, Kennedy's election, as kind of a handy date to hang things on.
Why 1960?
Because at that point Catholics kind of became mainstream America, and they were able to go get their own jobs, their own insurance policies, call their own lawyer if they got in jail. Prior to that, it was frequently the priest's role.
So what you're saying, though, up until 1960, the priests then also had a great deal of stress upon themselves to try to meet all of those kinds of needs.
They sure did.
But since 1960, things have indeed changed for Roman Catholics.
People's expectations have changed a lot. You are held accountable more, which I think is basically healthy.
Right. You grew up in the Roman Catholic system, is that correct? Went to
parochial schools, went to seminary.
And came to Texas when?
In 1958.
And have served parishes then in Texas since that time?
I took some time out to study, went to seminary in Houston. And
what I'm wondering is, have your expectations changed for yourself?
Definitely. Because I think the seminary prepared me much more to be kind of a control person. You're out there, you're in charge. And 29 years later, I really understand and feel very comfortable with Jesus saying, "I stand among you as one who serves." Not a slave, but very happy to serve.
To be a servant.
Right.
And comfortable and feel good about that role of being a servant.
Definitely.
Nancy, you also have grown up in the system of the faith community. I think you said in St. Louis, is that correct? And have been in the church all your life. And you serve as a lay person. You're not ordained in the tradition in which you live. Talk to me about how you as a lay person see the changes that have happened in terms of the way the people in the congregation view the worship leader, the clergy.
Well, like Ed said, when I was younger and was growing up, I saw the pastor of our congregation and viewed him as God, that he could do no wrong. And my parents viewed the pastor the same way. And I see today that there's a change there, that the lay people in congregations today are no longer viewing the pastor as the God, but I see it as I see it in a transition. I see that we're not quite comfortable with that. We look back and see, well, when I was little, this person and my parents viewed this person as someone who could do no wrong. But today I'm seeing this person as a real human being, and should I be?
Does that propose some kind of mixed feelings within yourself? That is it right for you to think of that person who is the worship leader in a human sense?
Not only is it right for me to think of that person, but should that person be coming across that way? Should I allow him to do that, or should I keep that person on that pedestal? And I think we're kind of, I'm really ambivalent at this point. And I think maybe 10 years from now, it'll be much more comfortable for us to look at our pastors and say, you know, you're just human just like I am.
Oh, won't that be nice? Steve, what I hear, a couple things coming out from both Ed and Nancy, is I hear the idea of image, how they were perceived up until 1960 in the Roman tradition, if you will, and also in Nancy's Lutheran tradition. But then how about the fact of authority? Not only how we perceive these people who lead us in worship and who counsel us and who baptize and marry us and do all those types of things, but how we see them in terms of authority. If you're God, wow, there's a lot of authority there. But now as an adult, I don't see you in that role of being God anymore. I think don't kids still call you God, Ed?
Up to about 2.5 or 3, that's it.
You lose your deity at that time.
Exactly.
Is that? My goodness, we can improve that, I think, a little bit. Huh? Steve, what do you think? How about this whole idea of authority and perception, and where does that come from?
Well, of course, I look at this a lot from a psychological point of view, because I've always mixed my ministry with therapy as well in terms of the things that I do. In October of last year, I had the fortune of working with another pastor to do a workshop for about 90 urban pastors, Lutheran pastors from across the country in Oakland, California. And we did a workshop called Healthy Families, Healthy Congregations. And what we asked each of the pastors to do is to introduce themselves and to talk about what they thought their role might have been in their family of origin. And about, I would guess 90%, all but 1 or 2, introduced themselves as either the family enabler, in other words, the one that was attempting to keep the family together because it was growing dysfunctional, or they were the family saviors, because the fact that things were just so crazy in their families that they were determined that they were going to do something about it, and for sure something was going to happen. So that oftentimes what clergy do is they don't understand themselves, as Ed Friedman, a leading psychologist, would say, they don't self-differentiate. They don't understand why it is they do what they do. So oftentimes they go out and become the suffering servant, putting their lives on the line, sacrificing themselves in relationship to their families, putting in 18, 20-hour days because God's calling them to do that. 2 of my very closest friends in the parish I served in California were about my age. One of them died of cancer 2 years ago, and the other one died of a coronary. And the third is undergoing quadruple bypass almost at this moment. That's kind of frightening. And I think a lot of that has to do with how we see ourselves and why we go into ministry in the first place.
Are you saying then a great deal of the stress that that clergy put upon themselves is self-initiated then, rather than being from, as Nancy and Ed have referred to, how the congregation or the parish sees them?
Well, I think it's a combination of that and also the situation of our times, because oftentimes clergy tend to be really sensitive to issues that are going on in the society, and often they're the only ones in the community, or the only ones in the neighborhood. For instance, the average urban pastor in the evangelical Lutheran church in America makes between $22,000 and $28,000 a year. And in many cases, they're working in the South Bronx or in Brooklyn or in East Oakland or wherever. And they're working with little or no resources. And their families are deteriorating, their children are acting out, but they're called. And so it's a combination of who they are as well as the times, because who else is in those communities to deal with all those needs?
Nancy, as you listen to Steve, what do you think about, what comes into my mind, so I'll give you a chance just to think about some of these things, what is the expectation level then not only of the congregation, of the laity in the congregation and the parish, right, but also the expectation of the clergy person, but also the expectation of the particular denomination, the leadership of the denomination. Well, we want you to go into these places and we want you to serve God and serve humanity. And it might be easy to take that next step and say, well, then I become God to these people.
Well, I think that could be it. I also agree that I think the church expectation of going in and serving without due reward. When we were in a society, in an agrarian society, when the pastor went into the small community and the farmers came and brought their things, if they couldn't pay them cash, they brought in chickens, they brought in food, they brought in all kinds of things so that the pastor and his family could survive. Well, when we're talking about, paying someone $20,000 a year and working 18 hours a day, that person can't survive on just that. At that point, the wife ends up having to go to work, or if there is no wife, that person just kind of ekes by, and there isn't somebody coming to bring a chicken to help take care of them. So they not only have the stress of the congregation to worry about, they also have the stress of taking care of their family. And that there is that, the burden of, I am the breadwinner, or I am the person who's taking care of my family, and I can't do it. I can't do it like this. How am I going to do it? So that all adds to the stress of what they have also.
Don't have a chalkboard up here. I'd like to have one so we could list some of these things for the viewers of Austin Faith Dialogue, things that they can do to help their community leader, their pastor, their priest, their rabbi. One thing I hear you saying is really be able to help them differentiate their role and who they are as person and as worship leader. Help them also in terms of their family life is one of the things that you can mention, and the responsibilities they have there. Look at their compensation package. What are they receiving in terms of compensation for their efforts and for their labors? Ed?
I think, Carl, you touched on something earlier on authority. I believe in authority of all kinds, parental authority, pastoral authority, civil authority, but authority is exercised and realized in a different way than it may have been 30, 40, 50 years ago. And it's not enough for me as a pastor to say, this is it. I have to be persuasive.
Convincing, is that right?
Convincing, yes. And I also think that that's more appropriate. Now that we've all read books which help us to think about God as female as well as male, and the old male omnipotent God who used coercion, and the female omnipotent God uses this incredible persuasion. It fits much better with our whole theology of grace. But in a practical way, people, I think there's a plus side to what Nancy touched on about us being seen as more human. If I stand in my congregation, without apology, I am Ed Jordan. I bring whatever skills and training I have, which you paid for, by the way. But I stand among you and with you to lead you and to help us both face the challenge of the gospel. You can be much more persuasive than that, I come from, well, like Oz. I'm behind the screen.
What in your tradition, in the Roman Catholic faith, what do you do with this reality of family? You have family, parents, I would imagine.
Yeah, my parents are gone, but I have brothers and sisters. I think my brothers and sisters happen to be, all of them are 1,000 miles away, and although we keep fairly good contact, I think I really have been blessed with close friends. And, half a dozen makes you incredibly wealthy. And I keep up those friendships and take time off from work for those friendships. They may not have anything to do with the current parish that I serve. But that's essential.
Do you schedule time off for yourself?
I'm pretty religious about my day off. funeral's about the only thing that preempts it ordinarily.
And you take,
But I've learned that.
And you take vacation for yourself?
Yeah, a little bit less religious there, but that's an important thing.
Let's pursue the idea that Steve raised. Is that scenario fair, this whole idea of family of origin, the idea of being the person who kind of steps from the family, of keeping things together into the seminary and into the rabbi training and becomes the worship leader, the congregational leader?
I think that does happen a lot. I think also, certainly at the time that I was thinking about the priesthood, there were two things. One, in a German-Irish family in the Midwest in the 40s and 50s, for your son to want to be a priest was a fairly high-status thing. And secondly, my introduction to the ministry started, I was going to be a foreign missionary. It was purely romantic. By the end of college, I got over that. But it was one of those very mixed motivations, I think, that we have for a lot of things.
Carl, I just wanted to say that I think it's really interesting and exciting that Monsignor Jordan is the one that brought up the issues having to do with changes in our culture in terms of roles of males and females, because I think a lot of what has historically been imaged in terms of the church's leadership has been white and male. And that's historically also a control trip for many folks, in that white males have led this country as well as the families of this world, and still a good segment of the population believe that that's the way it should be. And coming from a very authoritarian, top-down kind of church, which the Roman Catholic Church is, not that Lutherans aren't.
This is reputation.
I think it's really interesting that you should bring that issue up, because I think if women had more of a functional role within denominations, we'd see different ways of dealing with stress. We'd see different ways of dealing with emotion. You see, because we men are taught to internalize our emotion. And one of the things that causes stress is internalization of emotion. We're masters at being passive-aggressive, you know, because if we're angry at members, we can't come and get angry at them. We have to internalize the anger and smile and say, "Thank you, Mrs. Jones," even though she, you know, is really trying to control the church council or Mr. Jones, whoever it may be. And so we have a lot.
Steve, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, do you think it's really not possible for the congregational leader, the clergy, to go and say to Mrs. Jones, I am not pleased with you. I don't believe what you're doing is right or true, and have that type of give and take?
In lots of cases, no, because she may have a big pocketbook, you see, and you lose some congregations, they can't lose a big pocketbook. And Mrs. Jones, if confronted, may run, because the way most dysfunctional people manipulate churches is they either threaten not to come to church or they threaten not to put their money in the offering plate.
Yes.
Both are successful, you see.
And very stressful.
And very stressful.
Because it has to do something with that leadership and success and all that type of syndrome. What about, Nancy, you hear Steve saying that. What's your reaction as a woman and as an active lay person, not only in your worship life, but also in your professional life, working at a Christian college, on the staff there? Do you see that as what Steve says, in terms of there'd be less stress if there was more of an active role that the women would play in leadership?
Oh, I agree. I think that there would be, and I was really glad to see that the men here brought all of this up rather than waiting for me to bring it up.
Aren't you fortunate to be around such men?
I am.
Surrounded this morning with great men.
But do you know what I think? What I think is that these men and other ministers and pastors like them have learned these things themselves. That when they went to the seminary and when they were taught that that's not the information that they're getting from the seminary or from their theological school, they are still getting that they have to be the authority, that they have to, that they shouldn't be questioned. And I think that as soon as the people who are teaching ministers are able to say, well, we need to have that dialogue, we need to be able to present to one another that we are human, then that caring and...
This is a CBS News special report.
I'm Charles Kuralt, CBS News, New York. Edward Austin Tracy, 60 years old, after nearly 5 years of captivity, has been released as a hostage in Lebanon and is now about to appear at a news conference at the Syrian Foreign Ministry in Damascus. Mr. Tracy, in an earlier interview with Syrian television, said that he was treated pretty well. Some of his captors, he said, were pretty good cooks. And he says he feels well enough to go out and run a 100-yard dash right now. He's being introduced to a large crowd of reporters at the Foreign Ministry in Damascus. One of those reporters is CBS News' Alan Fizzy. Alan, how does Mr. Tracy look to you?
He looks pretty fit, Charles. I was surprised. There seems to be a little bit of a paunch underneath that clean shirt. That's not what you'd expect a hostage to have. He doesn't look as vigorous as John McCarthy did when he came out a couple of days ago, but then Mr. Tracy's a lot older man. It's interesting that he said he felt fit enough to run. I'll bet he's not willing to run back towards Lebanon at this stage, however. But I see that American embassy officials are there, and the next step for Mr. Tracy, once he gets through with this little bit of publicity, will be probably to go back to the ambassador's residence, rest a while, and then head for a special medical airlift plane sent down from Turkey, which will take him to Wiesbaden, Germany.
And there, I guess, American doctors will answer the question we were talking about, what sort of shape Edward Tracy really is in after nearly 5 years in a dark room.
Would comprise a beginning for closing the file of all
take it easy. You're going to spoil me. I haven't been on Time magazine for a year.
No doubt you notice that Syria, at the directives of President Hafez al-Assad, has always and is still exerting continuous efforts to end the sufferings of the hostages. We wish that this would help to secure the release of all Lebanese and Palestinians under arrest in Israeli jails. Sheikh Ubaid comes to the fore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shakur. It's a pleasure to be back in what a model country.
Thank you.
Because I have seen your name many times in Orient Leisure as well. It is a famous name in Orient Leisure.
Thank you.
Mr. Greg will have a statement also.
I just want to join you all, obviously, in expressing our great joy and relief at the release of Mr. Tracy, who had been held so long in Lebanon. We hope that this happy occasion today is an indication of continued efforts in Lebanon to restore the rule of law and to resolve differences in a new, peaceful, and constructive atmosphere. On behalf of President Bush, I want to thank the government of the Syrian Arab Republic for its role in the release of Mr. Tracy. In particular, I want to thank President Assad for his personal interest and his effort on behalf of the hostages. As relieved as we all are at Mr. Tracy's release, we continue to keep in our minds and in our hearts the remaining hostages, no matter what their nationality. The United States calls on all those with influence to exercise that influence so that, building on today's positive development, the hostages can be released promptly and without any condition. Now we're going to take Mr. Tracy back to the residence and get him ready to go back to the United States.
Would you like to tell us anything? Edward Tracy, appearing at the Syrian Foreign Ministry. He's 60 years old. He's just been released and is just exchanging a word or two with the reporters who had hoped to question him. He'll be off to the American Embassy now and then on to a medical examination in Germany. President Bush at Kennebunkport, Maine, said this morning that he is gratified by the release of Mr. Tracy, that he shares the happiness of all Americans for Tracy and his family. CBS News will continue our coverage of this story, of course. Sunday morning follows on most of these stations, and we'll take up the story there. Charles Kuralt, CBS News, New York.
This has been a CBS News special report.
Well, I think there are very few.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know they're good or whatever, but it's very few because, Ed, you're the guys who left after 9, 10 years in the parish, after you're ordained.
20 years, yeah.
And 20 years.
Right.
These are fine people who want to serve, am I right? But
and some of them are serving in other professions now.
Okay, but maybe overwhelmed by the demands because maybe our definition of spirituality had not been refined.
I think that's true. I want to say, too, I think it's important for us to not over-focus on our stress. Because when I look out at my congregation and see men and women both having jobs with 4 or 5 children, carpools, getting to work, picking up the kids, getting the groceries, buying them, I wonder when they sleep.
Yes.
And I think there's sort of a relief of stress if we sometimes share our stress.
That's exactly and are you able to do that? Are you able to share with your congregation that...
Yeah, with my school teachers and so on, I know they got a longer schedule than I do. And people talk about, but you're always on call. Well, so is the air conditioning man in Austin, Texas in July.
That's a very good point.
Round the clock.
Yes. And so that's that community idea that was brought out by Nancy. That that person also has stress as well as the pastor. Steve, we're about ready to come to an end of the program, and it's been very exciting. I thank the 3 of you for sharing this time. Do you have a last word as a pastoral therapist that you might want to say? And then, Nancy, I'd like to come to each one of you as we wrap up this program.
Well, I guess one of the things that I would like to say is that stress, like you say, is something that the whole culture has to deal with. I think if Christians are really aware of what's going on in their community, they're probably going to experience some stress, especially if they really care. And I think a part of being whole means for us as clergy to find ways not to just to affect change in our society in terms of the symptoms that cause the stress, but to actually be involved somehow in changing our world and our society in terms of the things that cause the stress. If I, as a clergy person, choose to know what's going on in this total Austin community, I'm going to be stressed out if I really care about it. But if I have some arena where I can be heard, where I can participate in the political system, where I can participate in change, I'm not going to be as stressed out.
Nancy, how about you as a congregational member? What's your last word?
As a congregational member, I think I have a responsibility to allow my minister to be human and to encourage my pastor to be human, to express that humanness, to encourage them to seek counseling if that's what they need to do, and accept that.
And rejoice in their humanity.
Yes.
Thank you, Monsignor, thank you. It's exciting to be a part of communities of faith here in Austin. And there's stress for you as there's stress for your worship leaders. We hope and pray that you'll continue to share in the community of faith where you live, and may God bless each one of you. Thanks for watching Austin Faith Dialogue.
Call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-7627.